What I'm going to talk about is a subject that I address in a new book that I have coming out October 1st. Moody published it, Moody Publishers. It's called Loving My LGBT Neighbor and Doing So in Grace and Truth. When you have written a few books, a dream of yours is to, rather than always pitch the books, find somebody who wants to publish them. It's a nice thing to have publishers contact you. Would you like to write a book for us? I always dreamed of writing a book, and now I've written quite a few of them, and now I have at least one time where a publisher says, hey, would you like to write this book? They called me one day and they said, we know that you have gone out for the last 10 years and debated the issue of same-sex marriage and gender and things like that on college campuses, and that you have developed a number of meaningful relationships with people on the other side of this issue. And we would be interested, would you like to write a book that talks about developing those relationships, but not out of a, can't we all just get along and put our differences behind us, but how do we develop relationships in spite of those differences? And I said, absolutely, I would want to write that book, primarily because of the grace and truth thing. We have so many books in the Christian market and the secular market of, can't we all just get along? Can't we just put our differences behind us? Or can't you guys just come over to our side and see that homosexuality and same-sex marriage and all that stuff is just fine, it's no big deal, and you come agree with us? No, the thing is we can develop meaningful relationships, get this, it's a radical idea, with people that we disagree with. And this is a particularly difficult issue because we as the church and those outside the church on the other side of this issue, we get very confused about, okay, what's right, what's wrong, can I be friends? How far do we go in the friendship? Where do we draw lines? How do I honor God and not get too swept away in the issue and things like that? It is a big question. And this is an issue that is with us. And we are going to have to be able to answer and address, how do we as Christians hang on to our faith, defend our faith, stand for our faith, but really, actually love and care for and build relationships with those people that are on the other side of our issue, LGBT folks. That is what we're going to talk about. In the book, I've got a whole bunch of stories of my friends who have these relationships and friends that I have relationships with that are on the other side of the issue. I'll just say on the other side of the issue because I don't want to, that are homosexuals, that are gay, that are same-sex attracted, those people, it's like you're pointing. I'll just say on that side of the issue. One relationship is a relationship that I've had for a long, long time. His name is John Corvino. He's a philosophy professor, an atheist, teaches philosophy, head of the philosophy department up at Wayne State in Detroit. He and I have been debating each other at college campuses across the nation for probably more than 10 years. And he says we don't date exclusively. We debate other people as well. It's not a closed relationship. But that relationship has been an ongoing relationship. And we've developed real friendships. What we'll do is, we'll fly into Philadelphia and then drive 2 hours out to, some college campus that has invited us. So many times we'll meet each other at the airport. Do you want to get the rental car this time? I'll get the rental car. And we'll take those 2-hour drive together. And we really do enjoy being together. We'll stay at the same hotel. In fact, it's interesting. Some of these events, the coordinators will say, now, is it all right if we book you guys at the same hotel? we're like, no, we can't stand each other, make them separate parts of the city. No, we get along, And it's interesting that the more we got along and the more friendship we developed and the deeper friendship we developed, the better we were able to go after each other in the debates. It's kind of like husbands and wives in a way, right? I mean, they brothers and sisters, they can just really go after each other. You would think the opposite. But as we felt comfortable, as I knew his arguments, he knew my arguments, and we would, like, John, you just can't say that. You're a smart guy. And he'd say the same about me. But it's still sometimes, maybe a long, quiet drive back to the airport. But we had that relationship. We were committed to one another, if you will, because of the experience that we had together and because he was important in my life and I'm important in his life. And that's very key. That's very critical. And students at these campuses would often, I can't believe you guys are friends. And you don't just say you're friends, you really look like you're friends, like you really enjoy being together. To which, we would look at each other like, yeah, how about that? Two people who disagree can be friends. And one of the other things, that's one of the reasons why we wanted to do these debates, is to exemplify to students and to faculty that two people can passionately disagree on something and still esteem one another and respect one another and also think the other one is just flat out goofy wrong, right? Now, in these relationships, difficult things come up sometime. And one of these times was we had a debate right outside of Detroit, and I was going to fly in, and John said, why don't you come stay at mine and Mark's house? Mark is his partner. I'd met him, very, very nice man. And me wanting to do things that reached out and said, you know what, John, I affirm you, I love you, I care for you, affirm you as a person. He said, why don't you stay at Mark and my house? And I said, you know what, I'd love to. So we made those arrangements, and the day that I was getting ready to fly out, my wife said, now, Glenn, you're going to go stay with John and Mark, right, at their house? And I said, yeah. She goes, have you asked somebody at work about that, your boss or somebody? And I go, no, I don't think I need to do that. She goes, you need to do that. So before I went right to my boss and asked him, I wanted to ask some other people. Okay, here's the situation. We're friends. I'm going to stay at their house. It's not a sex club party there, They're just quiet people. What do you think? And I got different answers for different reasons. You know what? I think you should go stay with him because it would be a nice show of kindness and grace to him, and that you don't think that he's got cooties and yucky and things like that. Others said, Glenn, you're a public speaker, you're a guy from Focus. If you're staying at a house with two gay guys, how would people understand that, right? Those are good questions. And you have to think about, okay, what would you do in those situations? Sometimes you're walking down these trails where people have never been before. Well, I went and asked my boss, and he said, I think it would probably be a good idea not to, just for the appearance of things and things like that. So I had to call John that day before I left and tell him that news, and I hated doing it, just because I didn't want to hurt my friend. So he took it incredibly personally, that, you know what, okay, you don't like me, you think we're horrible, you think we're, terrible, and you can't come to our house. Well, I had already been to his house. And we tried to talk, and I tried to explain it to him, and he said, well, you're not getting anywhere, Glenn. So the next day when I went to Detroit, we made plans to have a long, long lunch, and we talked it out. And one of the things that I said to him, I said, John, take it out of the gay issue. Take it out of making it personal about you. If you were living with your girlfriend, I could not stay with you because what you are doing doesn't line up with what we believe, what I believe. And he kind of understood that. At least it didn't make it personal about him. But our relationship, it was a little difficult after that. And we had to kind of work through that. And I understood that, and John understood that. Another guy, Jonathan Rauch, he is a journalist, works in Washington, D.C. I think he is one of the smartest and most cogent advocates for same-sex marriage that's out there. And he's fair, he's reasonable, he doesn't take unfair punches. He's wrong, but I think he's just one of the most reasonable guys out there. Well, I do a lecture series that focuses on the family every couple of months where I'll bring in different speakers, either Christian or not Christian, who have important things for the employees at Focus to hear. And it's a smaller little event, and the employees know, okay, we're going to hear somebody interesting that talks about what we do here at Focus. And I invited Jonathan to be one of those speakers, but I had to clear it with my bosses and the staff, and I explained who Jonathan was, and I said, I think it's important for our people to hear a good case for why same-sex marriage is reasonable rather than believing that we assume we know what that is. Let's let them hear from one of the best advocates about that themselves. Not that we can persuade them, of course, but if you're going to advocate for somebody, you ought to be able to react to the best, most cogent, reasoned arguments for that thing out there. So we brought Jonathan. Jonathan had a microphone. He had a lot of employees that focus on the family, and he could say anything that he wanted to say. And he made his case. He made his case for why he believes same-sex marriage was, worth supporting. And Jonathan and I have had a good relationship for quite a long while, and I knew he would respect and honor this opportunity. Well, he got done speaking, and I beforehand didn't tell my colleagues and peers at Focus, like, the gay man is going to be coming, please, please, please be nice to him, I didn't have to tell him that at all. And I was surprised by what happened after he got done speaking. The applause started and everybody stood up and applauded for a long, long, long time. Why did they do that? Because every one of them was now convinced that same-sex marriage was a good idea, or that, no, you gave us really something to think about. That wasn't it either. It was, Jonathan, we know you're in hostile territory. We knew it took a lot of you to come here and to face this, and this is our opportunity to show you some love, to show you some support, to show you some respect, that we are glad you're here. I didn't plan that. It almost brought tears to my eyes just to see my colleagues, my peers, respond that way. Now, going to a lot of secular campuses with Jonathan Rauch and John Corvino and a number of others, when we go to the secular campuses, I'm the one that gets the very hard time. I get booed, I get hissed at, I get made fun of, simply not because I'm, telling people what's wrong with them, simply because of the side that I'm on. Now, that's very, very important. And these peers of mine know, okay, I go to a secular campus and I get booed, I get hissed. At question and answer time, I get sarcastic questions that are not really questions, they're accusations. And then, Jonathan, you come to Focus, the belly of the beast, the people that really hate gay and lesbian people, right? And you get a standing ovation. One is that we invited you, and two, that you were loved on well when you came here. And he left knowing that he was loved on well. Again, nobody had to tell anybody at Focus, again, this is the gay man, please be nice to him. And so this is something that I want to talk about in making friends with our LGBT neighbors. That first of all, and we're going to talk about some of the myths, but this is one myth, that the Christian community is hateful, standoffish. You guys stand over there. We don't want anything to do with you. I have not yet had an invitation to go to the Human Rights Council in Washington, D.C., or any of the big gay and lesbian advocacy groups. They would never have me there. But Focus did, and other Christian groups have had people like Jonathan, other folks that are my friends. That's very important. I want to go into some of the specifics, though, about things we need to know in order to develop these relationships. And what I'm going to talk about is not all that the book is about, but I'm going to hit some somewhat technical points that it's important for us as Christians to understand. First is that there's a great equalizer. There's a great equalizer that puts all of us on the same footing with anybody else that we'll meet. And I'm going to end with that because that's very important. But this is what we must know. Our relationships with people on the other side of this issue must be developed in truth and not on myths. There are so many myths surrounding this issue that we can tend to bow down to, and I'll explain why and how that is in just a little bit, particularly within the Christian community. And we adhere to these myths out of a good heart. And as I explain them, you'll understand what I mean. But before we go to that, to what end do and should we develop these relationships? Is it to share the gospel? Emphatically, no. We should not enter these relationships with the intention of thinking, okay, I'm going to befriend this person so that I can have the opportunity to share the gospel with them. Okay, you know what that becomes? Kind of a multi-level marketing approach friendship. I'm not interested in you particularly. I'm just interested in your soul and your eternal destiny. Fine enough, that's good, but nobody wants to be somebody else's project. Okay? This person is only befriending me because they want to sell me their Girl Scout cookies or their insurance program or their gospel. Even though we don't see it that way, they will see it that way. They need to know, okay, this person just loves me for who I am, and they're interested in me. Then the gospel conversations can come up later after the relationship has been developed and established. But we do not develop relationships for any ulterior motive other than the value and care for the other person. That friendship in itself is an intrinsic good, period. And other things happen, but it's worth developing those relationships, those friendships, simply for who the person is. Now, we've got to understand, first of all, what God says about the issue of homosexuality and about same-sex marriage and things like that. I'm not going to go through the whole theology. What we talked about this morning actually has a lot to say about that. But God says, first of all, that we are two great commandments. Love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself, period. What neighbor? Certainly not this person over here, the Samaritan. Absolutely. Well, I should befriend the really nice people. No. God tells us through Christ and through Paul and the New Testament writers that we are to love our enemies. Love our enemies. Not just tolerate them, not just ignore them. You know, I'm not going to get tangled up with them, but I'm not going to say anything mean either. to love them, to care for them. We are called to do that. But loving your neighbor does not mean that all bets are off and you just don't ever have anything to say about them. You know, somebody slaps one side of your cheek, you turn the other side. When they slap this one and this one back and forth, you know what? You can say after a while, you know what? It's wrong for you to be slapping me. Or it's wrong for you to be doing that. I'm your friend, I love you, but what you're doing is wrong. Well, what you do is wrong too. You know what? Absolutely. That's the great equalizer that we're going to talk about at the end is sin, okay? Every one of us are tarred and feathered with sin, not one more than another, okay? Now this book, if you want to learn what God has to say about homosexuality and same-sex marriage, go read this book. Not really. It's by Gene Robinson. He is the first openly gay ordained bishop in the Episcopal Church. He's the Bishop of New Hampshire. He tells us that God believes in love, and this is his case for why homosexuality and same-sex marriage and things like that are good. When he says God believes in love, it's like, you know, you want to, no, he doesn't. Not at all. You know, I mean, like, what kind of claim is that? And what he's saying is, okay, what I'm going to argue for, God loves all people. Therefore, he loves what I'm going to argue for. It's a very manipulative kind of thing. And it really is a silly book in that he's a very smart man, but he makes very manipulative arguments. Here's one of them. I made a copy of the page because you need to see it for what he says. He addresses homosexuality in the Gospels. What does Jesus say about homosexuality? Question mark. Absolutely nothing. He says Jesus is not recorded as having said anything related to intimate sexual relationships between people of the same gender. One has to wonder, if homosexuality is such a heinous sin against God, why does Jesus himself never address it? Many people would think, wow, that's a good point. Logic students, it's called the fallacy from silence. I say in the book, what does Jesus think about going to Denny's with all your friends, having a big meal, and when you leave, not leaving any tip? Jesus never said anything about how to tip or whether to tip your waiter or waitress at the restaurant. But we can look at other things that he has said and make determinations about what he must think. And Gene Robinson knows that there are things that Christ said about a sexual ethic. Two of them are essentially the same thing in Mark 10, the early part of Mark 10, and Matthew 19. You know, we'll often hear this, Jesus never said anything about homosexuality. Well, if you think technically about those words, no. But he does say this. The sexual relationship, the intimate relationship between a man and a woman comes from creation at the beginning. From the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to cleave to his wife, and they shall both become one flesh. That is the biblical sexual ethic. Did Jesus say anything about homosexuality? He actually did. Did he say anything about premarital sex? He actually did. Did he say anything about cheating on your spouse? He actually did. Did he say anything about polygamy? He actually did. It's like God would say, okay, I gave you the smarts to be able to look at what I said. Is the rule